I am Arthur, 32 years old. Just 2 weeks ago, I experienced the most calculated public humiliation of my entire life, orchestrated by the very people who share my blood. While I was sitting completely isolated in a cheap fold-out chair next to a literal trash can at a 5-star rooftop restaurant, my brother looked at his wealthy future in-laws and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Do not worry about the bill, the ATM in the corner has it covered." My own parents laughed at me in front of 30 people, validating his cruelty without a single second of hesitation. But what they did not know was that I held all the cards. I was the legal guarantor of the very lifestyle he was using to impress his fiancée, and I had already begun quietly severing every financial tie. And now, they are desperately blowing up my phone, begging me to save him from financial ruin, a canceled wedding, and total public disgrace. Before I tell you exactly how this entire nightmare unfolded, please hit that like button if you believe in absolute justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Now let us go back to where it all began. The air on the rooftop of the Grand Meridian was crisp, filled with the intoxicating scent of expensive grilled seafood, imported floral arrangements, and unimaginable generational money. It was the kind of restaurant where the waitstaff wore better, more intricately tailored suits than most of the guests walking in off the street, and the breathtaking skyline view was built directly into the exorbitant menu prices. I stood near the entrance of the private VIP section, my hands resting carefully on a beautifully wrapped bottle of vintage champagne. I was wearing a brand new navy suit. I had even bought new, heavy silver cufflinks for the occasion, spending a good portion of my monthly salary just to make sure I looked the part. I wanted to look my absolute best. I wanted to fit in with the crowd my family was trying so desperately to court. I wanted to finally be seen as an equal, a valued member of the bloodline. Through the thick, soundproofed glass partition that separated the exclusive private dining area from the rest of the bustling rooftop, I could clearly see them. My family, my mother, Eleanor, was holding court at the center of the room. Her fake, high-pitched laugh carried faintly over the soft, live jazz playing in the background. She was wearing an elegant designer dress I knew for an absolute fact she could not afford. Likely purchased on a high-interest credit card she had absolutely no realistic intention of paying off before the end of the year. My father, Richard, was standing rigidly next to her, looking uncomfortable but nodding along enthusiastically to whatever Mr. Sterling, the father of the bride, was saying. Mr. Sterling was a massive, imposing figure, a man who looked like he commanded boardrooms and had never lost a real estate lawsuit in his entire life. And then there was Julian, my younger brother, the undeniable, undisputed golden child. He was 29 years old, handsome in that effortless, slightly arrogant way, and currently the absolute center of the universe as he celebrated his grand engagement to Clara Sterling. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing down my silk tie. My heart was actually beating fast with genuine, pathetic anticipation. This was it. This was the night we were finally going to act like a real, unified family. I had personally handled the reservation. I had dealt with the restaurant manager on the phone for 3 consecutive weeks to ensure every single detail was perfect. I had paid the massive $500 non-refundable deposit out of my own pocket to secure this exact, highly coveted spot because my mother insisted, with tears in her eyes, that Julian deserved the absolute best to impress his new, wealthy in-laws. I walked toward the entrance of the private section, an eager, hopeful smile forming on my face. I was ready to celebrate. I was ready to be a brother. But I did not even make it past the heavy velvet rope. A hostess named Chloe stepped smoothly in front of me, blocking my path. Her smile was tight, practiced, and entirely professional. She glanced down at her heavy leather clipboard, running a manicured finger down the guest list, then looked back up at me, and politely informed me that the main seating area was strictly at maximum capacity. I blinked, completely thrown off guard. I thought there had been a simple administrative mistake. I had personally booked a table for 20 people. I knew exactly how many chairs were arranged inside that room. But before I could correct her, Julian noticed me standing there like a lost tourist. He excused himself abruptly from Clara's wealthy uncle, sauntered over to the entrance with a half-empty martini glass in his hand, and looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. That was the exact moment everything shifted in my reality. That was the moment the solid ground beneath my feet turned to fragile ice, and the lingering, desperate hope I had clung to for 32 long years finally, irrevocably shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. He did not greet me. He did not say thank you for the deposit. He did not admire the expensive champagne. He just smirked. I had absolutely no idea that the next 2 hours would systematically break down every single illusion I had ever held about my family. I had no idea that I was walking blindly into a firing squad dressed up as an upscale engagement party. But looking back now, with the cold, unforgiving clarity of hindsight, I should have known. The glaring warning signs were always there, buried under decades of severe guilt trips, calculated financial manipulation, and the quiet, insidious expectation that my only purpose on this earth was to fund their perfect lives while standing quietly in the shadows. I thought the worst part of my family dynamic was over just by showing up and paying the deposit. I thought I had finally bought my way into their hearts. I was so incredibly, foolishly wrong. To truly understand how I ended up being treated like disposable human garbage at my own brother's lavish engagement party, you have to understand the deeply twisted, toxic dynamic of our household growing up. In my family, Julian was the prime investment, and I was merely the insurance policy. Julian was charismatic, loud, and constantly getting into trouble. But he had this smirk, this easy, manipulative charm that my parents just ate up like absolute candy. Whenever he failed a class in high school, my mother would confidently march into the principal's office and loudly declare that he was just too creative and brilliant for standardized testing. Whenever he crashed a car, my father would immediately blame the road conditions, the weather, or the other driver, never holding Julian accountable. They poured everything they had into him. Every single dollar of their savings, every ounce of their emotional bandwidth, went directly to catering to Julian. I was the exact polar opposite. I was quiet, deeply responsible, and practically invisible in my own home. I started working at a local, greasy diner when I was barely 16 years old just to pay for my own school clothes and basic necessities, because the family budget was always mysteriously tight whenever I needed something essential. I put myself through college using heavy student loans and working exhausting, bone-crushing night shifts at a warehouse. Meanwhile, Julian had his exorbitant university tuition fully paid out of a massive college fund my parents had somehow miraculously scraped together entirely for him. They never even offered to split it. He dropped out after exactly 3 semesters anyway, claiming the professors did not truly understand his entrepreneurial vision. The disparity was not just financial, it was deeply emotional. I remember one specific Thanksgiving dinner vividly. I had spent 2 entire days shopping, prepping, and cooking a massive feast for our extended family, paying for all the premium groceries out of my own meager salary. I wanted to impress them. I wanted to feel useful. Julian showed up 3 hours late, completely empty-handed except for a cheap, $10 bottle of wine he grabbed from a gas station on the way over. When he walked through the door, Eleanor literally pushed past me in the kitchen to embrace him, loudly praising him for taking time out of his busy schedule to be with the family. Nobody thanked me for the turkey. Nobody thanked me for the hundreds of dollars I spent. They just praised Julian for simply existing. But the real, systemic exploitation started when I graduated, landed a highly competitive job in the finance sector, and began making actual substantial money. I secured a lucrative promotion early on. My salary was very comfortable. I lived frugally, maximizing my 401k contributions, investing wisely, and actively saving for a down payment on a house. And my parents definitely noticed my upward trajectory. When my father's hours at his firm were severely cut back during an unexpected economic downturn, who do you think covered the massive mortgage so they would not lose their precious real estate equity? Me. I stepped up without complaining because I genuinely thought that was what good, loving sons did. When my grandfather passed away a few years later, Eleanor managed to secure a small inheritance from his estate. But instead of paying me back for the thousands of dollars I had poured into their mortgage, she secretly used the inheritance money to send Julian on a month-long, all expenses paid trip to Europe to find himself after a tough breakup. The absolute peak of this relentless financial abuse happened exactly 1 year ago. Julian decided he urgently needed to project the image of a highly successful entrepreneur to win over Clara and her wealthy family. He convinced my parents that he absolutely needed a luxury vehicle to drive potential clients around and secure major deals. A Porsche. But of course, his credit score was completely non-existent. He was 29 years old and practically lived off sporadic gig work and my mother's secret financial handouts. They came directly to my apartment. Eleanor sat on my living room sofa, crying real, heavy, theatrical tears, telling me that this was Julian's one big break in life. She swore on her life that his new business venture was about to take off and secure his future forever. She just needed me to co-sign the massive auto loan. Just for a few short months, she promised. She guilt-tripped me relentlessly, saying that family helps family, that I was so incredibly successful and I should want to share my abundant blessings. She brought up the concept of family loyalty until I felt like an absolute monster for even hesitating. Against every logical, rational instinct in my body, I signed the heavy stack of legal papers. I became the legal guarantor for a luxury car I never even got to sit in. Unsurprisingly, Julian made exactly 0 payments. 3 months later, the bank called me, aggressively threatening legal action and a lawsuit. To save my own immaculate credit score from taking a massive, destructive hit that would ruin my real estate plans, I ended up taking over the exorbitant payments completely. Julian drove around the city looking like a young millionaire, while I quietly ate the cost of his massive ego every single month. Whenever I tried to bring it up, my father would wave his hand dismissively and tell me to stop being so petty about money. My mother would say I was hoarding my wealth and that I should be deeply proud to help my brother establish his life. This brings us to just a few weeks before the engagement dinner. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing some complex work documents when my phone rang. It was Eleanor. Her voice was dripping with that syrupy, artificial sweetness she only ever uses when she wants to reach directly into my bank account. She asked how my work was going, completely ignoring my answers to rush forward to her actual point. Julian and Clara were officially engaged, and the Sterlings were expecting a top-tier, elegant celebration. Clara's family comes from serious, generational money, the kind of wealth that involves massive trust funds, sprawling real estate portfolios, and heavy-hitting inheritance lawyers. My parents were absolutely terrified of looking inferior to them. Eleanor explained in a frantic, breathy tone that they desperately wanted to host the dinner at the Grand Meridian. It was vastly outside their financial reality. Then came the hook. She lowered her voice, sounding incredibly vulnerable and stressed. She asked if I could just put my premium credit card down for the reservation. She claimed the restaurant urgently needed a $500 non-refundable deposit to hold the VIP section, and their personal cards were currently tied up. She promised me with absolute, unwavering conviction that they would pay me back the exact moment my father's next check cleared. She said it was going to be a truly magical night, a night to unite the families in joy, and they desperately wanted me there to celebrate with them as a core part of the family. I knew deep down it was a lie. I knew the phrase, "we will pay you back," was a complete, fabricated myth in our family vocabulary. But a small, pathetic, deeply ingrained part of me still wanted to believe her. I wanted to sit at a beautiful table with my family, raise a crystal glass of wine, and feel like I actually belonged to them. I wanted to be the supportive, loving older brother. So I took out my wallet. I called the restaurant. I booked the private room for 20 people. I paid the $500 deposit, and I even authorized my card to be kept on file for incidentals. I thought I was finally securing my rightful seat at the table. I had absolutely no idea I was actually paying to build the stage for my own public execution. The entire day of the dinner, I felt a strange, almost nervous sense of cautious optimism. I actively, desperately convinced myself that this time would actually be different. This was not just a casual backyard barbecue or a forced holiday dinner where they could easily ignore me. This was the formal, public merging of two families. Surely, They would treat me with basic human respect in front of the Sterlings. They would absolutely have to maintain appearances. They would have to acknowledge my contribution. I left the office early. I went home and carefully pressed my pristine white dress shirt until there was not a single microscopic wrinkle. I packed the custom-printed, high-quality congratulatory card I had ordered online specifically for Julian and Clara. I went to a highly rated specialty wine shop and bought a $250 bottle of vintage champagne. I wanted the Sterlings to see that Julian came from a good, supportive, highly refined family. I wanted to make my parents genuinely proud of the man I had become, the man who could afford such luxuries. I arrived at the Grand Meridian precisely at 7 o'clock. The smooth elevator ride up to the exclusive rooftop felt like ascending into an entirely different, untouchable world of privilege. The heavy brass doors slid open to reveal a breathtaking panoramic view of the glittering city, glowing brilliantly against the dark, velvet night sky. The ambience was absolutely flawless, exactly what you would expect for the price tag. I spotted them immediately in the glass-enclosed VIP section. The long dining table setting was stunning. I had personally coordinated with the restaurant manager over the phone for hours to arrange the custom floral centerpieces because Eleanor had complained bitterly that standard restaurant flowers looked cheap, tacky, and embarrassing. I paid for those expensive imported orchids out of my own pocket, too. Everyone was already mingling inside. Mr. Sterling stood tall and imposing in a custom-tailored suit, holding a heavy crystal glass of aged scotch. Clara looked absolutely radiant, laughing brightly at something my father said. Julian was aggressively working the room, shaking hands, making loud jokes, looking every bit the successful, self-made young business heir he was desperately pretending to be. I smiled, a genuine feeling of warmth swelling in my chest, and walked confidently toward the entrance of our private section. That was when Chloe, the hostess, stepped firmly in my way, bringing my forward momentum to a sudden, jarring halt. "Excuse me, sir. This exclusive area is reserved for a private event," she said, her voice perfectly polite but entirely unyielding. "I know," I replied easily, holding up the expensive bottle of champagne so she could clearly see it. "I'm with the Mason party. I am Arthur, the groom's older brother." Chloe looked down at her heavy clipboard. A slight, uncomfortable frown formed quickly on her face. "I am so sorry, Mr. Mason, but I was strictly instructed by the groom himself that the main seating area is at absolute maximum capacity for the immediate family and the bridal party." Before I could even process the absolute, mind-bending absurdity of that statement, I had literally booked a table for 20 people, and there were barely 15 people currently standing inside that spacious room. Julian spotted me. He abruptly excused himself from Clara's wealthy uncle and walked over to the velvet rope. He did not look happy to see me. He looked deeply, visibly annoyed that I was interrupting his grand performance. He did not even acknowledge the expensive champagne in my hands. He did not say hello. He just gave me that familiar, condescending, intensely smug grin that I had hated since childhood. "Oh hey, glad you finally made it. Julian, what exactly is going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice low, tight, and controlled so the Sterlings would not overhear our interaction. "She says the table is full. Julian, I booked this room. I paid the deposit." Julian did not miss a single beat. He did not look ashamed. He pointed lazily past the velvet rope, gesturing toward the far, dark corner of the rooftop terrace, completely outside the beautiful glass-enclosed VIP room. There, positioned right next to a massive stainless steel trash receptacle and the heavy swinging doors leading directly into the noisy, chaotic kitchen, was a tiny, wobbly fold-out chair and a cocktail table barely big enough to hold a single beverage napkin. "Sorry, man," Julian said, his voice dripping with heavy, sarcastic, mock sympathy. "This table is for family only. Clara's parents have a lot of really important people here tonight, but there's a spot for you right over there. It's perfectly fine." I stared at him. I literally stopped breathing for a full 5 seconds. I thought it was a terrible, incredibly tasteless, cruel joke. I looked past his smug face, locking eyes directly with my mother inside the brightly lit room. Eleanor saw me. She saw exactly what was happening at the rope. And you know what she did? She gave me a tight, uncomfortable, severe warning smile, completely turned her back to me, and took a long, deliberate sip of her white wine. My father suddenly found the intricate stitching on his expensive leather shoes incredibly fascinating. They were abandoning me. Again. Publicly. "You are kidding me?" I said, my voice dropping to barely a horrified whisper. "I paid for this room, Julian." "Do not make a scene, Arthur," Julian snapped fiercely, immediately dropping the fake smile, his eyes flashing with genuine irritation and entitlement. "Just go sit down. You always ruin the aesthetic when you look so utterly miserable anyway. Stop being so dramatic." He turned around sharply and walked right back into the vibrant, laughing party. Someone at the main table, one of Julian's freeloading, obnoxious friends who had somehow miraculously made the family-only cut, snickered loudly. The sound cut through the elegant jazz music like a rusted, jagged knife. I stood completely frozen at the rope. A hot, prickling sensation of profound, paralyzing shame crawled violently up my neck. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes lock onto me from inside the glass room. Mr. Sterling was looking directly in my direction, his thick eyebrows heavily furrowed in deep, analyzing confusion. He was clearly trying to figure out exactly why the groom's older brother was standing outside the VIP ropes holding a bottle of champagne like a hired, uninvited delivery boy. Every single rational instinct in my body screamed at me to throw the expensive bottle violently onto the concrete floor, curse every single one of them out, demand my money back from the manager, and walk away into the night. But the deep psychological trauma of a lifetime of conditioning is an incredibly heavy anchor. I was terrified of being the one to cause a massive public scene. I was terrified of giving Eleanor the twisted satisfaction of calling me dramatic, unstable, and insanely jealous to her new in-laws. I was paralyzed by the fear of finally breaking the family. So, I did the most pathetic, soul-crushing, humiliating thing imaginable. I swallowed my pride. I walked slowly over to the dark, isolated corner. I set my beautiful $250 bottle of champagne on the greasy concrete floor right next to the industrial trash can. I did not even take off my suit jacket. I pulled out the cheap, flimsy fold-out chair, its metal legs scraping loudly and painfully against the ground, and I sat down, alone, in the cold dark, while my family celebrated wildly 20 feet away, completely indifferent to my existence. I thought sitting there was the absolute bottom. I thought the emotional pain could not possibly get any sharper or more degrading. But the night was just getting started. For the next 2 excruciating, agonizing hours, I existed purely as a silent ghost haunting my own life. I sat rigidly in that incredibly uncomfortable metal chair, the cold, biting night air whipping fiercely through the fabric of my suit. Every single time the heavy kitchen doors swung open behind me, the overwhelming, nauseating smell of industrial dish soap, discarded seafood, and burning grease washed completely over me. It was a constant, undeniable, physical reminder of my exact value to the people laughing inside that glowing glass room. I watched them eat a lavish, multi-course meal. I saw plates of seared scallops, perfectly cooked filet mignon, and expensive truffles being served to people who had never worked a day in their lives to earn it. I watched them clink fine crystal glasses in endless, joyful toasts. I watched Julian stand up, confidently raising his glass, and deliver a sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated speech about how incredibly grateful he was to be surrounded by his closest, most loyal, and most cherished loved ones. He looked right through the glass partition, his eyes sweeping right past my dark corner without a single, microscopic flicker of hesitation, guilt, or remorse. He was a sociopath in a tailored suit. Not a single person from my family came out to check on me. Not one. Eleanor did not bring me a plate of food. Richard did not bring me a drink. The only person on that entire massive rooftop who acknowledged my human existence was a young, exhausted waiter named Leo. He came out of the kitchen doors, carefully balancing a heavy tray of empty plates, and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me sitting solemnly by the trash bin. He looked at my expensive, tailored suit, then down at the vintage champagne bottle resting on the dirty floor, and then over at the vibrant, loud, wealthy party inside the glass room. He did not ask any questions. He did not need to. The profound pity and shared understanding in his eyes were crystal clear. He quietly went back inside the kitchen, brought me a tall glass of ice water, set it gently on my tiny cocktail table, and gave me a sad, knowing nod before hurrying away to tend to the real guests. That single glass of tap water was the absolute only thing I consumed the entire night. As I sat there in the shadows, the initial burning shock and stinging humiliation slowly faded away, leaving behind something much colder, much harder, and much more incredibly dangerous. Clarity. Total, absolute, uncompromising clarity. For 32 long years, I had operated under the pathetic, desperate delusion that if I just gave enough money, worked hard enough, and sacrificed enough of my own happiness, I would eventually earn their love. I thought my financial support, my substantial salary, my willingness to protect them from every lawsuit, eviction, or debt collector, was a bridge to their hearts. But sitting by that trash can, listening to them laugh at my expense, I realized it was never a bridge. It was a leash. They did not love me. They loved my bank account. They loved my perfect credit score. They loved my pathetic willingness to be a silent doormat. I watched Mr. Sterling closely inside the room. The older man was not drinking much. He was sharp, highly calculating, observing everything. I noticed him glancing at my dark corner multiple times throughout the evening. His expression was hard to read, but he was definitely observing the bizarre, cruel dynamic. A man who built a real estate empire does not miss details like a brother sitting alone by the garbage. Clara, entirely wrapped up in the blinding excitement of her massive diamond ring and the center stage attention, was completely oblivious to the cruelty happening 10 feet away. Eventually, the dinner plates were cleared away by the diligent staff. The main event of the evening finally arrived. A towering, incredibly elaborate, multi-layered cake, completely covered in expensive edible gold flakes, was wheeled out to the center of the room. The jazz band smoothly transitioned into a slow, romantic tune. The sunset had long faded into total darkness, and the warm, glowing string lights inside the VIP room made the scene look exactly like a flawless, high-budget movie set. A beautiful movie I was strictly forbidden from acting in. Then, the music completely stopped playing in my head. Reality snapped back into sharp, terrifying, hyper-focused clarity. I saw Leo, the young waiter, walking purposefully toward the head of the long dining table. In his hand, he held a small, black leather folder. The final check. The room grew noticeably quiet as Leo paused near where Mr. Sterling and Richard were sitting. But Leo did not hand the folder to either of the fathers. He opened it, looked carefully at the long itemized receipt, and then glanced down at a printed slip of paper clipped firmly to the back. It was the credit card authorization form with the card currently on file. My card. Leo looked up, his eyes scanning the crowded room, desperately trying to find the name attached to the plastic. I saw Julian lean back heavily in his chair, a cocky, untouchable smirk plastered permanently on his face. He nudged Clara, pointed a finger directly through the glass at me, and spoke loudly enough for the sudden silence of the room to carry his voice entirely outside into the cold air. "Oh, do not worry about the bill tonight, Leo," Julian announced to the crowd, waving his hand with arrogant, theatrical dismissal. "The ATM in the corner has it covered. Go take it to Arthur." The entire room turned simultaneously to look at me. 30 faces, ranging from mildly amused to deeply confused, staring directly at the man sitting next to the garbage. Eleanor smiled nervously, a tight, vicious warning look flashing instantly in her eyes that silently commanded me to just pay the massive bill and keep my mouth shut to preserve the flawless family image. Richard looked down at his lap, intense cowardice practically radiating from his posture. Leo walked slowly out of the glass enclosure and approached my tiny table. He looked absolutely miserable to be put in this humiliating, degrading position. He opened the heavy leather folder and presented it to me with a physically shaking hand. "Excuse me, sir," Leo said, his voice quiet and deeply apologetic. "The total for the event this evening is $3,218. Should I run the card on file for the final amount?" $3,218. For a dinner I was strictly not allowed to eat. For a family that did not want me sitting at their table. For a brother who treated me worse than a stray dog. I looked down at the massive number printed on the receipt. Then I looked up, right through the glass at Julian, who was grinning wildly, eagerly waiting for me to pull out my wallet and perform my lifelong duty like a good, obedient, broken machine. I did not feel humiliated anymore. I did not feel sad. I felt a terrifying, absolute, earth-shattering calm wash over every single nerve in my body. I slowly stood up from the cheap fold-out chair. I picked up my suit jacket, dusting off the sleeve with precise, deliberate movements. I looked down at Leo and I smiled. A slow, steady, genuinely peaceful smile. And then I prepared to detonate the bomb. I looked down at the heavy, black leather folder resting in the palm of my hand. I could actually feel the physical weight of the $3,218 bill pressing into my skin. The entire rooftop terrace had gone completely, terrifyingly dead silent. Even the soft, ambient noise of the city traffic below seemed to vanish into the cold night air. The jazz band in the corner had completely stopped playing, their instruments resting awkwardly in their hands as they stared at the unfolding disaster. 30 pairs of eyes were burning intense, judgmental holes directly into my back. Through the thick glass partition of the VIP section, I could see Julian leaning back heavily in his expensive, cushioned chair. He had his arms crossed over his chest, sporting an arrogant, untouchable smirk. He was completely expecting me to reach into my tailored suit jacket, pull out my premium credit card, and silently absorb the massive financial blow just like I had done every single day of my adult life. He honestly thought he had me completely trapped in a corner. He genuinely believed that my deep-seated fear of public embarrassment, my lifelong conditioning to protect the family image, would force me into immediate submission. He thought I would rather pay $3,000 than cause a scene in front of Clara's wealthy parents. I slowly, deliberately closed the leather folder. I did not open my wallet. I did not break eye contact with my brother. I handed the folder back to Leo, the young waiter, whose hands were physically shaking. Leo looked like he desperately wanted the concrete floor of the rooftop to open up and swallow him whole. I took a deep, grounding breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, sharp night air, and I looked directly through the glass partition at Julian. My voice was completely calm, incredibly steady, devoid of any trembling or hesitation, and loud enough for every single person on that expensive rooftop terrace to hear perfectly. "Not my table," I said. Those 3 words hung in the heavy air like a physical object, a brick thrown straight through a glass window. Inside the brightly lit room, the arrogant, deeply satisfying smirk on Julian's face instantly vanished, entirely replaced by a look of profound, genuine, unadulterated confusion. He blinked rapidly, as if his brain completely failed to process the auditory information. Eleanor's jaw actually dropped open, her wine glass freezing halfway to her mouth. Richard, my cowardly father, sat up completely straight, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the heavy wooden edge of the dining table. Mr. Sterling, Clara's incredibly wealthy father, immediately narrowed his sharp eyes. His keen business instincts instantly kicked in, sensing the sudden, violent shift in the power dynamic of the room. He knew exactly what a financial dispute looked like, and he was watching me with intense calculation. "Excuse me, sir?" Leo whispered, holding the black folder awkwardly against his chest, completely unsure of protocol. I said, "This is not my table," I repeated, projecting my voice so it echoed slightly against the thick glass and carried over the silence. I was explicitly, directly told by the groom that the main seating area is strictly for family only. I was instructed to sit out here by the trash receptacle. Therefore, I am not a part of this engagement dinner party. I did not eat your expensive food. I did not drink your fine wine. I was not welcomed. I will not be paying your final bill." Julian stood up abruptly. The loud, abrasive sound of his heavy wooden chair scraping violently against the expensive hardwood floor echoed through the VIP room. He pushed open the heavy glass door, marching out onto the terrace. His face was flushed red with sudden, aggressive, uncontrollable anger. He stormed over to my tiny, dark corner, puffing out his chest, desperately trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me into backing down. "Arthur, what the hell do you think you are doing?" Julian hissed, keeping his voice dangerously low but laced with absolute venom. "Are you completely insane? Stop making a massive scene and just pay the damn check. Clara's parents are watching every single move we make. You are actively embarrassing the family. Do your job." "I am embarrassing the family?" I asked, letting out a short, sharp, bitter laugh that held absolutely no humor or warmth. "Julian, you literally forced me to sit next to an industrial garbage disposal unit for 2 hours. You treated me like a stray, infected dog begging for scraps at the back door of a restaurant. You did that, not me. Your actions have consequences." Eleanor rushed out of the VIP room, her expensive high heels clicking frantically, almost dangerously, on the smooth concrete. She lunged forward and grabbed my arm, her manicured fingernails digging painfully through the fabric of my suit jacket. Her face was a terrifying mask of sheer, desperate, unhinged panic. Her entire carefully constructed reality was rapidly disintegrating in front of the Sterlings. "Arthur, please," she whispered frantically, her eyes darting nervously back to the glass room where Mr. Sterling was actively watching us. "Please just put the balance on your card. We will figure it out tomorrow morning. I promise you, Arthur. I swear on my actual life. We will pay you back every single penny. Do not ruin your brother's big night, his entire future, because of a silly, minor misunderstanding over seating arrangements." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm, and then I slowly lifted my head and looked directly into her eyes. The exact same eyes that had watched me sacrifice my hard-earned salary, my precious college fund savings, and my own psychological peace of mind for decades. The exact same eyes that had just watched me sit completely alone in the freezing dark for 2 entire hours without demonstrating a single microscopic shred of maternal guilt. "Take your hand off me, Eleanor," I said firmly, my voice turning into solid ice. Eleanor violently recoiled as if my suit jacket had suddenly caught fire. She stumbled back a half step, her hand flying to her chest in shock. I had never called her by her first name in my entire life. "You are not going to pay me back," I said, raising my voice again so the entire room of wealthy guests could hear the absolute, unvarnished truth. I wanted the Sterlings to hear every single word. "You have never, ever paid me back. Not a single time. Not when I covered your massive mortgage payments for 6 months so you would not lose your real estate equity. Not when I paid for your weekly groceries. And certainly not when I was forced to take over the exorbitant monthly payments for that ridiculous luxury Porsche that Julian drives around town, actively pretending he bought it with his own non-existent salary." Loud, undeniable gasps erupted from the main table inside. Clara's head snapped violently toward Julian, her eyes wide with absolute, horrified shock. Julian turned a sickly shade of pale gray, completely losing his arrogant, untouchable posture. His broad shoulders slumped. He suddenly looked like a trapped, cornered animal desperately searching for an exit. "Shut up, Arthur," Julian yelled, completely losing all remaining emotional control. "You are lying to them. You are just insanely jealous of my rapid promotion, my upcoming real estate investments, my perfect life. You have always hated me because I am successful. I paid the $500 non-refundable deposit for this exact room tonight out of my own checking account," I continued, completely ignoring his frantic, pathetic outburst. I looked directly through the glass at Mr. Sterling, who was now standing up, his expression dark, serious, and utterly furious. I paid for the custom imported floral arrangements currently sitting on your dining table. I bought this $250 bottle of vintage champagne to celebrate your daughter's engagement. And in return for my financial support, my own family forced me outside the velvet rope like a peasant. So no, Julian, I am absolutely not paying this final bill. You are the highly successful, self-made entrepreneur, right? You pay it. I turned my attention back to Leo, the waiter, who was watching the scene unfold with wide, terrified eyes, still clutching the leather folder. Leo, I said clearly, cancel the pre-authorization on my credit card immediately. If a single unauthorized charge from this establishment hits my banking account, I will personally hire a ruthless lawyer and file a massive, financially crippling lawsuit against this restaurant for credit card fraud. Do you understand my instructions? Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. I will remove the card right now. Leo nodded quickly, backing away rapidly toward the safety of the swinging kitchen doors. I slowly, methodically picked up my suit jacket from the back of the cheap folding chair. I did not look back at my mother, who was now visibly, uncontrollably trembling, her fake, wealthy, high society facade completely shattered into a million unfixable pieces on the concrete floor. I did not look at my father, who was actively hiding in his chair like a pathetic coward, refusing to defend his oldest son. And I certainly did not look at Julian, who was currently stammering incoherently, desperately trying to formulate a convincing lie to tell the furious Sterlings. I simply turned around and walked purposefully toward the exit. I did not wait for the slow elevator. I aggressively pushed open the heavy steel door to the emergency stairwell, the loud, metallic sound echoing powerfully behind me. With every single step I took down those cold, concrete stairs, an incredible, massive, suffocating heavy burden miraculously lifted off my tired shoulders. For the first time in 32 years, I was no longer a human insurance policy. I was no longer an ATM. I was finally truly free. I walked for almost an entire hour through the dark, busy city streets, letting the cold, biting night air slowly cool the massive amounts of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I bypassed the subway. I needed the physical movement to process the magnitude of what I had just done. I had finally detonated the bomb. I had burned the bridge. When I finally unlocked the heavy wooden door to my apartment, the deep, comforting silence of my own home felt incredibly welcoming. I tossed my keys loudly onto the granite kitchen counter, took off my tailored suit jacket, poured myself a tall glass of cold water, and finally looked at my cell phone. It was completely, absolutely blowing up. The screen was a chaotic blur of notifications. There were exactly 27 missed calls and a relentless, unending flood of aggressive text messages. The massive family group chat, which usually only came alive during major holidays to coordinate potlucks or when someone desperately needed a financial favor, was absolutely radioactive. It was a digital war zone. Eleanor had sent a massive, terrifying wall of text. I cannot even begin to believe you would do something so incredibly vindictive, calculated, and deeply cruel. You intentionally humiliated us in front of Clara's entire extended family. Mr. Sterling is absolutely furious with us. You purposely ruined your own brother's life and his future marriage out of pure, unadulterated spite and jealousy. Call me the absolute second you read this message. We need to do massive damage control right now. Julian's direct messages were pure, unhinged, violent rage. You are officially dead to me. You are a psychotic, jealous, pathetic loser. You better fix this massive mess right now. You better call Mr. Sterling first thing tomorrow morning and tell him you had a severe mental breakdown and hallucinated the entire thing. You better pay that restaurant bill. Fix this, or I swear to God I will ruin your life. Even Richard, who historically avoided any form of conflict at all costs, chimed in with his usual cowardly appeasement. Arthur, that public display was highly unnecessary and deeply embarrassing. We could have easily discussed your hurt feelings about the seating chart privately at home. You need to formally apologize to the Sterlings and to your brother for your massive public outburst. Please call your mother. She is crying hysterically. I stared at the glowing screen. I did not reply to a single one of them. I did not feel the familiar, heavy, suffocating weight of intense guilt that usually accompanied their collective anger. For the first time in my existence, their words held absolutely no power over me. I just felt an incredible sense of deep, peaceful, analytical detachment. I placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter and drank my water. Just as I was about to walk away to take a hot shower, the screen lit up again, buzzing aggressively against the granite. It was an incoming call from an unknown, out-of-state number. Against my better judgment, I picked it up and answered it. "Hello, Arthur? It is Clara." Her voice was remarkably quiet, completely devoid of the joyful, bubbling, infectious energy she had displayed just a few short hours earlier at the restaurant. She sounded incredibly exhausted, like someone who had just abruptly woken up from a terrifying, disorienting nightmare. "Hi, Clara," I said cautiously, bracing myself for a verbal assault. "I am truly sorry for the massive scene earlier tonight. I honestly did not want to disrupt your engagement night or cause you any personal pain." "Do not apologize to me," Clara said quickly, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Please, Arthur. I am the one who should be apologizing to you. I am so sorry you were treated that way. Arthur, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely, brutally honest with me. Did you really pay for the venue deposit? And the expensive imported flowers? And are you really paying for the Porsche?" I leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, letting out a long, slow, exhausted breath. "Yes, Clara. I paid the $500 non-refundable deposit. I paid for the custom floral arrangements. And yes, I am the primary legal guarantor on Julian's luxury Porsche. He has never made a single, solitary payment on it since the day he drove it off the dealership lot. I cover the exorbitant monthly premium every single month strictly to protect my own credit score from being destroyed by his negligence." There was a long, incredibly heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could literally hear her shaky, uneven breathing. "Clara, are you still there?" "They lied to us," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly, breaking under the weight of the betrayal. "Eleanor and Julian. They sat down with my father in his private office last week to discuss the detailed dinner arrangements. My father generously offered to pay for the entire event to celebrate. But Eleanor aggressively, persistently insisted on handling it. Do you know what she told my father? She told my father that you had practically begged them on your hands and knees to let you pay for the venue. She said you felt highly insecure and deeply depressed about your lower salary compared to Julian's massive, booming success as an entrepreneur, and that you desperately wanted to contribute as a grand gesture of goodwill to make up for your past mistakes and jealousy. I closed my eyes tightly, pressing my fingers to the bridge of my nose. The sheer, calculated, sociopathic malice of that specific lie literally took my breath away. They had actively, intentionally framed my lifelong financial exploitation as an act of desperate, pathetic begging. They had used my own hard-earned salary to buy their own elevated social status, while simultaneously, maliciously painting me as the pathetic, insecure, underachieving loser of the family to her wealthy parents. "I never offered, Clara," I told her, my voice turning hard, cold, and razor-sharp. "Eleanor called me, crying hysterically, claiming they needed a massive financial favor just to hold the reservation. I did it because I foolishly thought they actually wanted me there to celebrate with my brother. And then Julian intentionally put me outside next to the garbage disposal. My father is a very powerful, very traditional, deeply principled man," Clara continued, her voice rapidly gaining strength and righteous anger. "He values absolute honesty and integrity above all else in his business dealings and his personal life. When you walked out tonight, he demanded to see the restaurant manager immediately. He demanded to see the actual credit card authorization forms. When he saw your specific name printed on the deposit receipt and the floral invoices, he completely, utterly lost his temper. He realized Julian was a total fraud. He realized Julian was totally broke." "What happened after I left?" I asked, genuinely curious about the fallout. "He forced Julian to pay the remaining $3,000 right there in front of the entire dining room," Clara said, a hint of dark satisfaction creeping into her tone. Julian frantically tried to use 3 different credit cards. 2 of them declined immediately for insufficient funds. He had to practically beg one of his sleazy friends to cover the remaining balance. It was the most pathetic, humiliating thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. My father looked Julian dead in the eye and told them that if they could publicly humiliate and financially abuse their own blood relative who supported them, he shudders to think how they would treat me or my trust fund, once I was legally bound to them by a marriage contract. I am so incredibly sorry you got caught in the middle of this toxic mess, Clara, I said sincerely. Do not be, she replied firmly, her voice entirely devoid of tears now. You did me a massive, life-saving favor, Arthur. You showed me the absolute truth before we signed a legally binding marriage license, or dealt with joint real estate, or faced horrific custody battles and ruthless divorce lawyers 5 years down the road. Thank you for your honesty. She hung up the phone. I set the device down, feeling a profound, deep-seated sense of closure. The truth was finally out. But the chaotic night was still not over. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the bright caller ID showed Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice is Eleanor's older sister, a highly wealthy, incredibly sharp-tongued woman who made an absolute fortune in commercial real estate in the 90s. She was a master psychological manipulator in her own right, always playing vulnerable family members against each other purely for her own twisted amusement. Arthur, darling, Beatrice purred smoothly into the phone, her voice dripping with toxic delight. I just heard the absolute most fascinating, delicious gossip from my sources about a spectacular little disaster at the Grand Meridian tonight. Bravo, sweetheart. Truly bravo. It is about damn time someone finally knocked Eleanor off her ridiculous high horse. Hello, Beatrice, I said, feeling my emotional guard instantly go back up. You know, I always quietly wondered exactly how long you would let them completely drain your impressive salary before you finally snapped. She continued, clearly delighted by the unfolding drama. Eleanor has always been insanely, pathetically insecure. Ever since we were young children, she had to have the absolute best toys, the most expensive clothes. When Julian was born, she decided he was going to be her golden ticket to high society. She actively, intentionally used your college fund to pay for his private tutoring. Did you know that? I gripped the cold edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned bright white, the blood draining from my hands. What did you just say? Oh, yes? Beatrice laughed lightly, a cruel, tinkling sound. Your late grandfather left you a very specific, highly lucrative inheritance solely intended for your university tuition. A dedicated college fund. Eleanor secretly convinced Richard to illegally funnel it directly into Julian's private accounts because she claimed you were smart enough to get academic scholarships anyway, and Julian needed the financial advantage. I knew all about her little illegal financial schemes. I just sat back in the shadows and watched to see what you would do when you finally found out. The sheer, sickening disgust I felt in that exact moment was completely, utterly overwhelming. Beatrice knew about the severe financial abuse for decades. She knew they literally stole my inheritance, a crime that could have involved a lawyer and a massive lawsuit. But she never warned me. She never stepped in to help her young, struggling nephew while I was working night shifts at a warehouse. She just sat comfortably in the shadows, eating popcorn, enjoying the twisted reality show of my immense suffering, waiting patiently for the inevitable, explosive confrontation so she could ruthlessly gloat over her sister's public downfall. You are just as toxic and completely morally bankrupt as they are, Beatrice, I said quietly, the realization settling heavily in my chest. Excuse me? Her tone instantly turned sharp and highly offended. You knew they were robbing me blind. You knew they stole a massive college fund from a teenager. And you did absolutely nothing because you hate your own sister more than you care about anyone else's well-being. You do not care about me. You never have. You just deeply love the drama and the destruction. Do not ever call this number again. Lose my contact information permanently. I hung up the phone and instantly blocked her number. I realized then, with absolute terrifying clarity, that my entire family tree was deeply, fundamentally, irreversibly poisoned at the roots. I could not just prune a few bad branches and hope for the best. I had to uproot the entire thing from my life, burn it to the ground, and salt the earth. And I knew exactly where to start my offensive strategy. The next morning, I woke up feeling completely, vibrantly energized. I did not experience a single, fleeting ounce of regret, guilt, or sadness. I made myself a strong, black cup of premium coffee, sat down at my home office desk, opened my laptop, and began the highly meticulous, deeply satisfying process of severing every single remaining financial cord connecting me to the rapidly sinking ship that was my family. First, I checked my text messages. There was a new, frantic text from Julian, sent at exactly 6 a.m. His tone had drastically, pathetically shifted from aggressive, violent rage to desperate, pleading panic. "Arthur, please answer me. Clara is completely ignoring my calls." Mr. Sterling's ruthless corporate lawyer sent a formal, threatening email to my parents threatening massive legal action over the deposit money they supposedly lied about. I am taking Clara to a very expensive, private apology lunch at Le Petit Maison at noon today to beg for her forgiveness. I need to make this right. Please, I am begging you, transfer $2,000 into the joint checking account right now so I can pay for the lunch and buy her a gift. I swear on my actual life I will pay you back next week when my commission hits. Please, bro, save me from this. I stared at the glowing message on my screen. The sheer, unadulterated, breathtaking audacity of this man was actually hard to fully comprehend. Less than 12 short hours after treating me like literal, disposable garbage, humiliating me in front of 30 people, and threatening my life via text, he was actively demanding more of my hard-earned salary to fund a luxury apology lunch to fix a massive mess he entirely created. I did not reply. Instead, I opened my secure banking application on my laptop. Years ago, during one of Julian's many periods of intense financial transition, which was just a polite family term for him being fired for gross incompetence, Eleanor had emotionally blackmailed me into opening a joint checking account with him. It was supposedly meant to be a temporary emergency fund, a vital safety net to keep him from being evicted. I had initially deposited $5,000 of my own salary into it. Over the years, I foolishly, blindly continued to top it off whenever he cried about missing a crucial utility bill or needing emergency gas money to get to a phantom job interview. Currently had exactly $3,412 sitting in it, 100% my money. I immediately initiated a massive, complete internal wire transfer. I meticulously moved every single penny from that shared joint account directly into my highly secure, private, high-yield savings account. I deliberately left a balance of exactly $0.00. Then, I picked up my phone and called Oliver, a senior branch manager at the bank who I knew personally through my firm's corporate accounts. I explained the situation briefly, explicitly citing urgent financial security concerns and the potential for unauthorized overdrafts. Oliver, a seasoned professional, understood immediately. Within 15 short minutes, the joint account was permanently frozen, flagged, and completely closed. Julian's debit card, which was linked directly to that specific account, was now absolutely nothing more than a useless piece of decorative plastic. At exactly 1:15 p.m. that afternoon, my cell phone started vibrating violently on my wooden desk. The caller ID flashed Julian's name. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called again immediately, and again. On the fourth desperate try, I finally pressed accept and put the phone on speakerphone while I calmly continued typing an important email to my boss regarding a promotion. "Arthur," Julian yelled, his voice echoing with sheer, absolute, unadulterated panic, completely ignoring any form of greeting. "What the hell did you do? I am sitting at the table at Le Petit Maison with Clara. The waiter just brought the massive bill. My card declined. It says the account does not even exist. Transfer the funds right now. I am literally begging you." "I cannot do that, Julian," I said calmly, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee. "What do you mean you cannot do that? Stop playing these psychotic games. Clara is staring at me. I look like a complete, utter fraud. Move the money before the manager calls the police. I closed the account, Julian, I stated, enunciating every single syllable with crystal, undeniable clarity. I took my money back. All of it. You explicitly told me last night that I was not family. You proudly told the entire restaurant that I was just an ATM sitting in the corner. Well, I have news for you. The ATM is permanently out of order. You cannot do this to me, he screamed, his voice cracking wildly, drawing what I assumed was immense attention from the other wealthy diners at Le Petit Maison. This is my entire life. You are ruining my life. You are a highly successful, self-made entrepreneur, remember? I replied coldly, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for the man who tried to destroy me. Use your massive real estate profits. Or better yet, ask Clara's father for a small business loan. I am absolutely sure he would love to help you out after last night. Goodbye, Julian. I hung up the phone, went into my settings, and permanently blocked his phone number. The subsequent fallout was incredibly rapid and absolutely spectacular. I heard the granular details a few days later from Marcus, a mutual acquaintance who loved toxic gossiping more than he loved breathing oxygen. According to Marcus, Clara stood up at the expensive restaurant, looked Julian dead in the eye with utter disgust, and walked out without saying a single word, leaving him completely stranded with a $400 lunch bill he could not pay. He had to frantically call Eleanor, begging her to read her high-interest credit card numbers over the phone to the highly annoyed waiter just to escape the restaurant without the police being called. 2 days after the failed, disastrous lunch, I received a highly formal, incredibly polite email from Clara. It was brief and straight to the point. She had officially broken off the engagement permanently and returned the massive diamond ring via certified courier. Mr. Sterling had his team of corporate lawyers contact all the luxury wedding vendors, canceled the massive, six-figure contracts, and explicitly informed them that his prestigious family was no longer associated with the Masons in any financial or personal capacity whatsoever. Without Clara's immense family wealth to artificially prop him up, Julian's entire fake, carefully constructed life collapsed like a fragile house of cards in a Category 5 hurricane. A week later, I officially contacted the auto loan company holding the title to the Porsche. I formally, legally revoked my status as a guarantor, providing them with extensive documentation of Julian's fraudulent claims regarding his verifiable income and his inability to pay. Since Julian could not provide a single pay stub to prove he had a salary to cover the massive monthly payments, the bank immediately sent a repo man to collect the luxury vehicle. He had to stand on the sidewalk and watch them aggressively tow the Porsche out of his expensive, gated apartment complex in broad daylight, right in front of his wealthy neighbors. Unable to afford his exorbitant rent without Eleanor secretly funneling my hard-earned money to him every month, Julian lost his luxury apartment. The 29-year-old golden child was completely evicted. He was forced to pack his expensive designer clothes into cheap black garbage bags and move back into his childhood bedroom at my parents' house. I honestly thought the sweet, peaceful silence would last forever, but I severely underestimated them. Narcissists never truly give up when they unexpectedly lose their primary financial supply source. Exactly a month after the explosive restaurant incident, while I was enjoying a quiet Sunday morning, I heard a timid, hesitant knock on my apartment door. I looked through the small peephole. It was Eleanor. She looked completely, utterly exhausted. Her expensive designer clothes were completely gone, replaced by an oversized, faded, moth-eaten cardigan. Her hair was unkempt, lacking its usual expensive salon blowout. In her shaking hands, she held a large, heavy glass Tupperware container filled to the brim with homemade lasagna. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just a crack, leaving the heavy, brass security chain firmly in place. I did not invite her inside. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling violently, desperately trying to project the pathetic image of a broken, loving, contrite mother. "Please, can I come in? I brought your absolute favorite dinner. I spent all morning making it from scratch, just like when you were a little boy." I looked down at the lasagna, and then I slowly looked up at her face. Years ago, This incredibly small, manipulative gesture would have had me instantly opening the door, crying tears of relief, and forgiving absolutely everything just to feel the fleeting warmth of her conditional approval. I would have paid off 10 Porsches for a homemade meal. But I was no longer that terrified, desperate, unloved child desperately seeking validation. "I am not hungry, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice completely neutral, devoid of any anger or affection. She physically flinched at the use of her first name, as if I had slapped her across the face. "Please, Arthur. The house is a complete, unlivable nightmare. Julian is incredibly depressed. He refuses to leave his childhood bedroom. He just stares at the wall. Your father and I are struggling terribly to pay the mortgage without your generous monthly contributions. We are facing severe, immediate financial penalties from the bank. We might lose the house. We made a terrible, terrible mistake. We were just blinded by the overwhelming wedding stress and the pressure from the Sterlings. Please, just let me in so we can sit down and talk this out as a family." "We are not a family," I replied smoothly, leaning against the doorframe. "You are simply a group of toxic individuals who happen to share my DNA and manage to successfully, systematically exploit me for over a decade. I know the absolute truth, Eleanor. I spoke to Beatrice. I know all about the college fund. I know you and Richard intentionally stole my legal inheritance from grandfather to pay for Julian's European vacation and his private tutoring while I worked night shifts." Her face went completely, shockingly white, all the blood draining from her cheeks. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly like a fish suffocating on dry land, completely unable to formulate a lie fast enough to cover her tracks. The lasagna dish trembled violently in her hands. "I am officially permanently done," I said, looking her directly, fiercely in the eyes, ensuring she understood the absolute finality of my words. "I am never giving you another single dime of my salary. I am never co-signing another fraudulent loan. If you ever contact my office, if you try to speak to my boss, or if you show up at my apartment door again, I will instantly hire a lawyer and file a formal, legally binding restraining order against you for severe harassment. Take your lasagna and go home." I gently, firmly closed the heavy wooden door, sliding the deadbolt locked with a loud, satisfying metallic click. I walked away into my living room, leaving her standing entirely alone in the quiet, empty hallway. The next year of my life was a period of profound, beautiful, incredibly difficult transformation. I used the substantial amount of money I was no longer actively bleeding out to my parasitic family to finally hire a top-tier, highly recommended therapist. Sylvia was a brilliant, no-nonsense professional who helped me meticulously, painfully unpack 30 years of deep psychological manipulation, severe emotional neglect, and complex financial trauma. She taught me that setting absolute, immovable boundaries is not an act of cruelty against your family. It is the ultimate necessary act of self-preservation. She helped me realize that I was never responsible for fixing their broken lives or funding their delusions of grandeur. With my personal finances finally completely under my own strict control, my bank accounts rapidly, exponentially multiplied. I poured my energy into my career instead of my family's drama, and I secured an even higher, incredibly lucrative executive promotion at my firm. I finally achieved my dream. I bought my own house, a beautiful, sprawling piece of real estate in a quiet neighborhood with a massive garden in the backyard. I even took that month-long trip to Spain that I had endlessly, painfully postponed for years because my family always conveniently had a sudden, fabricated financial emergency right before I was supposed to leave. I stood on a sun-drenched balcony in Barcelona, drinking a glass of genuinely excellent local wine, feeling the warm breeze, completely unbothered by anyone else's fabricated crises or demanding text messages. Julian is currently working a grueling, minimum-wage retail job at a local mall just to slowly pay off the massive, suffocating mountain of high-interest credit card debt he accumulated while desperately pretending to be a rich entrepreneur. Eleanor and Richard had to heavily downsize, selling their large, beautiful suburban house to avoid foreclosure and moving into a cramped, noisy, two-bedroom apartment near a highway. I hear these updates very occasionally through the grapevine, usually from Marcus, but they no longer trigger any emotional response in me. They feel like boring news stories about complete strangers living in a different country. I used to be absolutely terrified of being entirely alone in the world. I thought tolerating constant abuse, disrespect, and financial exploitation was simply the required, non-negotiable price of admission for having a family. But the absolute, undeniable truth is this. Sitting completely alone at your own table, entirely at peace with yourself, is infinitely, profoundly better than sitting at a crowded, loud table where everyone secretly views you as a disposable human ATM. I finally built my own life, firmly on my own terms with my own money, and I have never, ever looked back. If you have ever felt like the designated scapegoat or the mandatory financial safety net in your own family, know this: your intrinsic human value is not determined by how much psychological abuse you can silently endure. Your self-worth is not measured by your corporate salary or your pathetic willingness to be a doormat to keep the peace. You have the absolute right to stand up, look them directly in the eye, and proudly, loudly say, "Not my table." Have you ever faced something similar with your own family, where you were used for your resources? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.